and welcome to The Game Changers, the podcast where you'll hear from extraordinary, trailblazing women in sport. I'm Sue Anstiss, a founding trustee of the Women's Sport Trust charity and the CEO of Promote PR, one of the UK's leading sports communications agencies. In this special edition of The Game Changers, I'm talking to a woman who's had an enormous impact in football. Eni Aluko is an accomplished footballer, a lawyer, a media personality, and now a best-selling author. She's one of only 11 female footballers to have represented England over 100 times, and she's won multiple club and individual honours for Chelsea and Juventus. She was the first female pundit on Match of the Day. She holds a first-class law degree and is an ambassador for UN Women UK and Common Goal. Always using her voice and platform to champion social progress, Eni was involved in a high-profile racism case against the Football Association, which led to critical reforms within the governing body. Enduring a truly horrible 2-year battle, including a huge amount of negative press, Eni finally received a public apology from the FA for the discriminatory remarks made to her and another player by head coach Mark Sampson and other staff. This autumn, Eni released her autobiography, They Don't Teach That, which tells the story of her life from a young girl playing football on her estate with her brother through to being a high-profile professional footballer. It also sheds light on the full story behind the issues with the FA and the England setup. I was thrilled to meet Eni at the very beautiful Soho House Hotel in central London. We settled down to talk in what we thought was a quiet corner, only to find people clearing tables behind us, so apologies for the background noise in places, but I'm sure you'll agree it doesn't detract from what is a fascinating conversation with Eni. I began by asking her why sport was a part of her life growing up.
Honestly, I don't feel like I had a choice. I think I was born with this gift of playing football. And I found myself, like every other kid, playing outside in my local estate, playing football with all the boys, and just was very good at it. You know, no one really taught me how to play. No one sort of sat me down and said, right, this is how you control a ball, this is how you trap a ball. It was just there. It was just a gift that I had. I guess it's kind of similar to like when singers talk about when they started singing. It's just like, it was just there. It was their earliest memory. And artists talk about how they draw. You know, you're just born with these. I really believe that sort of you're born with these gifts that you're meant to kind of share with the world. And yeah, so it kind of found me, you know, and I played in my local area, and that was my form of acceptance, really.
And did you see girls and women playing football at all when you were young?
No, not at all. So obviously I grew up in the 90s, born in 1987, grew up in the 90s, and women's football was very much just not something that I saw at all, actually. And actually for the longest time I felt quite odd. You know, I felt like I was the only girl that played football. And so that was quite strange for me, because you kind of can only aspire to be something that you see. And the nearest thing that I saw was the Williams sisters. You know, that's when they were starting to really come up. So it was quite difficult, actually, because in my local area I was very much accepted for playing football, but then the wider society didn't really understand it. So I got a lot of kind of friction when it came to football in a public setting.
I was going to ask about that in terms of coaches and parents, and as you went to play more competitively.
A lot of our views and our mentality reflects society. I think if you were to go to sort of a youth game now in 2019, you would not find parents screaming from the sidelines, why is a girl playing? But back then, society didn't accept women's football. It didn't see it as something that was girls should be doing. It didn't see it as mainstream. So parents thought it was okay to question why a girl was playing, especially when they were better than their sons, right? That was tough as well, because again, it was me trying to find myself and find my kind of validation all the time. And I very much grew up as a young girl trying to always seek validation from other people, because I was this person that was a bit like strange and like played football or whatever. So, but now I look back and I'm like, actually, what makes you different is your superpower, you know? And I try and tell young people all the time, like, you know, whether it's something that society calls an illness or dyslexia or, you know, ADHD or, you know, you're a girl doing something, that is actually what's going to set you apart.
Fantastic.
You know? But I was always trying to like be accepted and, why are the parents not being nice to me? And
we hear a lot of teenage girls dropping out of sport at 12, 13, 14. Was that ever a risk for you, do you think, of stopping playing sport?
Yeah, absolutely. It was, and I did. I think after I had a few sort of situations where I feel like parents were, you know, being like, you know, questioning my whole existence. I went into tennis. I was like, I'm done with this, and I went into tennis. I was decent at tennis. Me and my brother were decent at tennis, but tennis wasn't really something that I felt I could I was like naturally gifted at. I had to practice a lot. I had to train a lot. I was very impatient, so like when I wasn't making the shots, I'd get angry, and you know, it's a very patient sport, and I just wasn't that kid. So I only got so far in tennis, and there was longing for football again.
In terms of other role models, you mentioned the Williams sisters. Were there other female role models you remember seeing in the sports environment as you were growing up at all?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of heard of like Mia Hamm, but she felt very distant. Like, oh, there's this American player that's like the men called Mia Hamm, and it was like I never saw her. Yeah. You know what I mean? I actually never saw her play. But it was something that I think a lot of young girls growing up were like, oh, like Mia Hamm, and I saw pictures and stuff, but I never actually saw her play growing up.
Was there a point, can you remember a point when you thought, yeah, I'm really good at this? Was there a moment when you realised?
When I was young, when I was young, I used to just be fearless. I used to just dribble around, you know, and I talk about it in the book, just like that feeling of like dribbling on the estate around Coke cans and jumpers for goalposts, and that I was the freest then, you know, and that's actually something I try and tap into when I feel the pressure now as a pro footballer, and I think that's something that it's quite sad. I think when you ask a lot of footballers, professional footballers, like, do you enjoy what you do? A lot of them, if they're honest with themselves, would say no in like the pressure moments, because it gets really serious and intense, and actually the freer you feel, the better you're going to play.
Like when you were a child.
Like when you were a kid. And it sounds really cheesy, but it's true. Like when I went to America for the first time and was playing pro, I had a coach that told me, like, when was the last time you actually enjoyed this? And I was like, not for a while, you know. And he was like, well, go back to that place. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm going to do that. And I just started scoring. I started enjoying it. I wasn't analysing every mistake. You know, it is a mindset. It's a mentality.
And you went to Loughborough for trials when you were under 15s for England?
Yes.
How did that feel then to be around other girls that were you know, very exceptional players?
So the first time I got called for England was around 14, and it's a great story actually, that I turned up in a suit. And you know, at the
heels
at the sort of insistence of my mom, and it was very embarrassing because everybody else was like, "What on earth? She's turning up for school." And but I think if anything, that shows how important it was to me and my family. And I remember actually my first camp, we did a fitness test, and I thought like the fastest, I had to run the fastest, and you know, I was really fast. So, and then I pretty much like died after like
on that beep test.
Yeah, not realizing that it was like an endurance test. So it didn't go too well that first camp. I think, you know, I embarrassed myself on, but you know, I think they saw my talent, and
you went on to have an extraordinary career. So over 100 caps, one of only 11 players, I think, to have over 102 caps you had. And can you remember that time? I think your first cap was when you were 17. So how did it feel running out representing England at 17?
Well, I say this in the book that my first cap actually, I look back and I'm like, why was I so nervous? Like I was so nervous to the point where every time I got the ball, I just was like, oh, get rid of it. And I don't know whether I was ready or whether it was almost like a bit of an imposter syndrome kind of thing, where I was like, oh, like I'm not ready for this sort of thing, and was just very fearful in that game, when actually what got me there was being this kind of free player. But I guess it didn't, you know, Hope Powell didn't hold it against me, I guess. She picked me
again. So. And how did you juggle that, I guess, that time of being a young player? So you were juggling working, studying, training. You were in Birmingham and travelling down to Midlands to Charlton and so on. So how did you manage to juggle that?
I don't know. I think when you really want to do something, you figure out a way. And I knew that at that time I needed to move on from Birmingham. I felt kind of closed in, and I wanted to kind of push myself. And maybe it was the time of my life as well. I was moving on to uni, so I felt like I needed to expand my horizons with football as well. But like, you know, traveling from Birmingham, going to college, traveling, and then having to come back on the last train, it was hard. It was hard, and a lot of the time I had to stay at friends' houses, and it was really tough.
Yeah. Do you think you ever at the time felt you'd just like to have a normal teenager's life as a student?
Yeah, I did at times, but I think, you know, as I said earlier, like, when you have this kind of passion and gift inside of you, no matter which way you try and move it, it's going to try and come out. So I was just trying to figure out the best way to play football at a higher level and go to school. Like, that's just, I mean, I didn't really have a choice of not going to school because, as I said, women's football wasn't a career path at the time. It was still kind of a hobby that paid you a little bit, but essentially I had to prioritise school as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And your book was launched this summer, so They Don't Teach This, and as I mentioned to you, I listened to it on audiobook, which I think just made it so much more personal for me, hearing your voice. And one of the things I think was quite difficult to listen to, but so important to hear about, was that full story of what happened over those years, the battle for justice really with the FA. And I think before that I picked up various elements in newspaper articles and media interviews, but I certainly wouldn't have said I knew the full story. So how does it feel for you to have been able to finally tell the whole story?
Well, I'm so happy you say that, because that's what the book was, you know, that's what particularly that chapter was about, you know, and writing a book is a whole process, and you've got to kind of figure out how you want to tell that story in the most authentic way, but also give the reader a true picture of what happened. And I do think there was a lot of misconceptions, there was a lot of kind of half-truths, a lot of lies, frankly. So I'm glad that, you know, the book has addressed a lot of that, but also given people an understanding that it wasn't just a 1-week event. You know, this was
Absolutely.
a 2-year...
It was almost 5 years, wasn't it? Yeah. From when the first incident happened to now. So an apology almost.
Yeah.
Was 5 years.
Well, it was 5 years, yeah, it was 5 years. So it was a long time, and a long time for me to have to deal with a lot of the stuff that went on. And I think, you know, in this country, the media takes that for granted. You know, I think a lot of the time the media doesn't understand that if you put out something, people digest it, and that becomes the truth.
Yeah.
So having the opportunity to write a book and address all of that, I think is a huge opportunity, and I'm glad that I've done that. I think anyone now that doesn't understand the full story will probably never understand.
And how confident do you feel now that the culture you were subject to is no longer present at the FA?
Yeah, very confident. I think, and I have to be careful not to take credit for this, but I think since my case, certainly you've seen a huge shift in terms of women's teams and women's players actually saying, no, actually we're not going to accept this anymore. Yeah. You know, there's so many examples. There's, you know, Norway standing together for equal pay, which they've achieved now. Australian women's team said to their old coach, listen, this is a culture of fear and bullying, we're not having it. New Zealand, the same. Obviously, the US national team with the equal pay fight. The list is endless. And then individual players like Ad Hegerberg saying, actually, you know, I don't feel comfortable in this environment. So I feel like I'm part of that conversation, and I feel like I'm part of that sort of general discourse of female football getting to a place where, no, like, we are professional athletes and we should be treated in that way. So I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of kind of being part of that movement, if you like.
And do you think things at the FA have changed?
Honestly, Sue, I don't know. I can't tell you that. All I can say is that after my case, I did speak with the FA about addressing some of these issues so that it never happens again.
And they listened.
And they listened, and they worked with UK Sport to kind of form a whistleblowing policy. They worked with UK Sport to try and understand how conflicts of interest can work if a player complains against a staff member. It's all on paper, but, you know, these things are tested practically. So I can't tell you, but I would hope that, you know, lessons have been learned from the past. I'm sure they have.
And ultimately, I guess it's not about whistleblowing, but you want to have a culture where it isn't necessary for someone to be a whistleblower. Whilst it's great that that's in place.
I've been part of many amazing cultures in football. Some very bad, some amazing, and ultimately, if you create a culture where players feel safe and players feel like they can be the best versions of themselves and not isolated, then you're not going to get any complaints. So it's it's a chicken and egg situation.
And speaking out when you witness injustice, obviously very hard, especially when you've seen other people vilified for speaking out. So what was the hardest part for you, do you think, at the time?
I think there's many things that made it hard. I think waking up every day to see yourself kind of in the paper and representations of you that are just not you, I think that was very hard. And I got into a lot of battles with journalists, just like, how can you sleep at night, like knowing that you're writing this stuff and you know it's not true? That was tough.
It's really hard.
Because I think journalism is a very high, well-respected profession. I mean, I'm sort of pseudo-journalist myself, writing the Guardian column, and I know every single word is important. So I do think, the media played a big part in a lot of the kind of character assassinations that came towards me as a whistleblower. A whistleblower, or, I mean,
reluctant.
I don't really like to, reluctant one, should not be vilified for telling the truth. Yeah. But, that's what happened. I was victim blamed. That was hard. And then I think just in general, just the lack of understanding from my teammates. I mentioned just a minute ago that so many of women's teams have come together as a team.
Got Megan Rapinoe
regardless of your individual or personal stances or opinions, you're part of a team, and every single player in that team should feel supported. And so that was the lowest point for me, like the lowest, in terms of me thinking, hold on a second, like I feel like I'm very much somebody that any of my teammates can pick up the phone and say, oh, what do I do with this or that?
Contract, you've done so much in the past to help, and you've been a bit of a spokesperson for the team as well.
I took pride in that. Yeah. And so when it came to my issue, I feel like either players were lied to or they didn't feel like the issue of racism was important enough for them to speak out about it. And I'm not saying speak out in terms of sacrifice their whole career, but I think take a stance and say, actually, this is going on. We're not getting involved personally, but racism is not something that we condone in this team.
And I think you look at the likes of Me Too and those movements, and actually it's the power of movement, isn't it? It's everybody coming together.
Who was it that said, I think it was Madeleine Albright, that said there's a special place in hell for women that don't. Yeah. I mean, it's a bit strong, but I believe that like, if you cannot support other women, particularly teammates,
absolutely,
there's a problem there. There's a problem there.
And what advice would you give to other women now that might be going through those issues, be that in sport or in business? Is there anything you've learned?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a process. I think you've got to be able to, first of all, kind of deal with whatever problems you have internally first, exhaust that, and then if there's a further problem, I think then address it kind of higher up. But don't be afraid to stand in your own truth, because ultimately you become empowered by that process. I'm a much better person, stronger person for being able to say, do you know what, if it costs me X, Y, Z, this is my truth and I'm not accepting this. It's very difficult because it's case by case basis.
Absolutely.
But I think that, in any walk of life, if you look at the people that are remembered, they stood for something massive, and it may have cost them something, but they definitely left a legacy as a result of that.
And it feels as if you've kind of fought injustice from when you were very young. There's a lovely story in the book around you were at school and talking to the head teacher about the kind of hairstyles for school and so on. Yeah. Why do you think that is? Why was that so important to you from a young
I don't know, maybe it's because I felt, as a kid growing up, I felt a little bit I felt antagonized a little bit, and I always felt like I could speak for myself, but other people couldn't necessarily do the same. And I always was like, oh no, speak for yourself. So I kind of stepped in where there was a bit of a gap, I guess. And maybe it's just the lawyer in me that was always meant to come out, I consider myself quite a laid-back person, but I think when it comes to like injustice and unfairness, you see a whole different side to me.
Eni.
And that's just, I can't really explain why that is. So, yeah, I mean, at school, that story in school, I didn't see it as kind of like standing up for justice. I saw it just as like, this doesn't make any sense. Yeah, this doesn't make any sense. And luckily, I had a bit of ground with the head teacher, and she was like, actually, you're right. And I was like, okay.
It's good to hear.
That feels good.
And clearly, you chose to kind of fight for truth over your career, really, which was a massively brave, courageous decision. So can you remember a point in which you felt there was a chance you would never play for England again?
Oh, I knew as soon as I got dropped.
Okay.
Yeah, I knew because it was, as I said, such a build up to that point. And actually, when I was even in the team, I felt like it was that anxiety constantly of like, he's waiting to drop me. I say that in the book. Yeah. So a lot of the sort of messaging and the sort of emotional manipulation, I felt it was like, if I make any mistake, I'm out. So when it actually came, I was like, okay, well, that's it. So I knew. And it sounds like, okay, Annie, you're just saying that, but I really did know. And I think that's why it got serious so quickly after that point, because I knew that it was kind of a systematic build-up to that point.
To get you out. And was there an opportunity this summer? Obviously, you've gone to play at Juventus, you've, double-header winner, and you've scored so many goals. Might there have been a chance for you to come back and play again in the World Cup this summer? Was that something? Would you have come back if...
That's a really good question. I think one thing I've tried to do in the book is kind of move the conversation forward. It's amazing how, I got dropped in 2016 and obviously haven't played since, and my life has moved on so much as a result of that. And so I think it would have been very difficult to go back into that environment, not because I don't love playing for England, but I just think it's chalk and cheese.
And you'd had 102 caps. It wasn't as if you were at the very early stages.
Yeah, it's kind of, I look at my England careers, despite the sort of ending, I do look at it as a sort of glass full situation. So I think it would have been difficult because other things have come up that I'm equally as passionate about, like punditry and travelling, and as a footballer playing for England, you get maybe a summer off. You get like a month off maybe in the summer, if that, and a week at Christmas. You don't get to travel. You don't get to spend time with your family. So I've been able to, as a result of not playing for England, I've been able to do things that I never would have been able to do.
That's fantastic.
I'm not saying that's just been my experience.
Yes, and that one door closes, and
absolutely
moves me on to my next analogy. Actually, so the Game Changers podcast is all about trailblazing women, and I love that analogy of women opening the door for others in the future to come through to. So, what do you feel the impact of your actions will be for women playing football in the future, now and in the future?
I hope just one of empowerment. I hope people look at me and say, okay, she spoke up even though it was difficult, or defended her teammates even though it was difficult, or said things other people wanted to say but couldn't say. I hope that that's an example for young women, because I think when women really stand in their truth, they're just so powerful, I mean, look at Megan Rapinoe's speech the other day.
I know.
Just incredible, just incredible woman who's using her platform to change the world. And that's all it takes. That's all it takes. Put the ball in the back of the net, play well, and use pointed moments to speak to things that are going on, and you can change the world.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, the phrase of standing your truth. That's very super powerful.
Absolutely.
Listen to the book. One of the most powerful elements for me that stood out was your honesty about that need to be accepted. And I think so many women feel that in business and in life and in sport.
Well, I think life starts at the point where, one, you stop caring about what other people think, which is easier said than done, and two, you're able to not rely on what people think about you. I think this is one of the reasons why anxiety and depression has increased, because we live in this world where everything is validation, how many likes, how many retweets, and it's like, that's fine, because ultimately everybody likes loads of likes and retweets. That's normal. But if you can start from the point of self-validation, all that stuff doesn't affect you that much. So if I put something out on social media and actually one person likes it, it doesn't matter because I've already told myself I'm enough. The problem is that a lot of young people put so much emphasis on that, haven't told themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it affects them so much that they start telling themselves, I'm not good enough, I'm not enough. All because of people that, quite frankly, probably haven't got their self figured out, So it was a process for me because, particularly in the England team, I kept thinking, okay, but I'm a good player too, but I wasn't getting that reinforcement. And I was constantly looking for that reinforcement. It wasn't coming. So I started telling myself I wasn't good enough. But then it was like, okay, what am I going to do? Like, how am I going to make myself feel better? So I started watching videos of myself scoring. I started just doing things that made me feel better, that fed that kind of ego in a way. So it's been a process for me, but I'm really, really big on self-validation. And it's not about being arrogant, but it's about saying, I know what I can bring to the table. I know I'm good enough. I know that I'm not perfect, but these are the things that, I'm good at. And that, particularly for women, being the sort of starting point.
Yeah. And your mum, I love your mum through the book, but that's just clearly an extraordinarily strong woman herself too. And I think she definitely helped you in that process of...
Yeah, no, my mum gave me a lot of sort of hard lessons. And I think we need people like that in our life that are going to say, I support you, but this is the truth. I support you, but maybe you should do it this way. And I remember my mom distinctly saying, listen, you're putting way too much emphasis on your coach. You're putting way too much emphasis on other people when ultimately you started playing football when you were 5 years old. These people didn't exist, and it was like one of those shock moments for me. And I woke up and I was like, do you know what? She's right. And there's a line in the book, one of my favorite lines in the book, and my mom says, your destiny is so much greater than the people that are trying to block it. Because ultimately, when you are successful, you will have people that are trying to block you or jealous of you, or because of their own view of what you should be, can't see you any further. But you got to see beyond those people. My mum was massive with that. She was really, really big with that. Yeah.
Fantastic. So good to hear. And we hear so much, don't we, with boards and businesses and so on, that diversity is so key to success. The setup of the England team, I think, at the time when you had so many issues with the coach, was really about over-conforming, so players having to suppress their individuality with a really massive groupthink focus. So I wonder if you think how teams can have that balance of being united as a team, but also maximising the kind of brilliance of individual players at the same time?
That is a really good question. I think that if you are part of a team, you automatically have sort of team values that are ingrained in you. I think there's a lot of fear around individuality. I think people think that individuality means that you're not part of a team. Yeah. You can't have both, but you can. Yeah. My favourite player is Messi. He's one of the best individual players of all time, but he's also a great team player.
Yeah.
So if you build a culture of team without forcing it down people's throats, they love being part of a team, but let their individuality play out too.
Shine.
I think too many coaches, particularly English coaches, are terrified of individuality because it means, I can't control it. It's all control. And it's like, no, just let it be. Let that blossom. And you're going to have to tweak things now and again. But if you look at Liverpool, for example, like Liverpool men's team, if you look at Mohamed Salah, Sadio Mane, Roberto Firmino, those three individuals are amazing as individuals, but they're also amazing as a three. Yeah. But if you remove their individuality, they wouldn't be amazing as a three. So one feeds the other.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's a coaching point, a cultural point.
Yeah, interesting.
And I think actually in the England team, it swung way too far the other way. That everybody kind of had to be a sheep that conformed. It became almost like a cult. Where if you spoke out a line or you said certain things, or sort of questioned things, you were black sheep. It's not the way it should be.
I'm personally not a very religious person, but clearly your faith is a huge part of your life. It's really well expressed throughout the book. And
I'm glad about that. I was terrified about that.
It's really interesting, isn't it?
I didn't want to come across too preachy, because I think religion can be that. Religion can be very... I mean, I don't see myself as a religious person. I see myself as a person of faith, you know, that I think can be shared in any religion that you have. I think religion is more kind of showing that you do certain things in order to be considered. But I was worried about that, because I thought, in this day and age where it's kind of like...
And that was my question, really. I think being vocal about your faith isn't as accepted in perhaps UK sports as it is in the States even as well. So do you feel it was different?
In the States more so, actually.
More accepted or more...
More accepted, yeah. I mean, I remember when I played in the States, there'd be 6-7 players praying before the game. In England, it's only me. And I do it very privately. No one really knows. And
do you think that had an impact on attitude towards you, and that whole being slightly different to the rest because you had such strong faith?
No, I don't think so, because I never pray publicly. It's always a private moment for me. So I'm sure a lot of players probably didn't even know I was that a person of faith. But I think it's very important. You know, a lot of people say, we shouldn't mix with football, but for me, it was like a survival instinct. You know, if you think there's something higher and bigger than you that is guiding you, you sort of always see whatever experience you're going through as part of the bigger plan, you know, and that was...
You needed that at times.
That was how I saw it. And actually now I've come out of it, I'm like, that's why that happened, and that's why that happened. And so I think faith is huge for me personally. And I hope, you know, for anyone who's going through something, who reads the book, maybe they'll explore it themselves and find out themselves.
And you were the first female pundit on Match of the Day, so 2014. What kind of response did you get at the time to that?
It was really great. I was kind of worried about the response, but I've always been someone that wasn't really afraid to be the first, because I thought there's a risk, but there's a huge opportunity at the same time. So I felt very ready to go on the show. I was very prepared. And I just thought, just chat as if you're talking to some guys on the sofa, you know? And I sort of normalised it as much as possible. So when I went on the show, I looked very relaxed, and I got really great feedback. I was really, really happy about it.
And then you've gone on to do commentaries, you and Alex, and the Men's World Cup and the Women's World Cup. So
Alex is doing amazing.
It's brilliant.
Amazing. It's amazing that we both played together. A lot of the time we played on the right. And she's doing amazing. I haven't been able to watch Strictly or anything, but
she's lovely. She's come across as so lovely, and I think we've seen the different side of her there as well.
Yeah, she's done great. Great pundit too.
Are you enjoying that? Would you like to do more of that in the future?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, football is my passion, so I want to be able to kind of talk about it and show that an opinion about tactics or players or managers or rules in the game, it's not gender specific, you know. I've watched as much football as any other man has watched, so thankfully the conversation has become less gender specific now, and it's like, Eni Aluko knows what she's talking about, Alex Scott knows what she's talking about, as opposed to, they're women.
Slow hand clap.
But that, you know, I say it in the book that if you are a pioneer, you've got to be ready for people that are going to kind of push against the status quo. But also there's going to be people that say, actually,
hello,
that's really
quite good.
That's really good. I never wanted to be kind of clapped up just because I was a woman, you know, because some of my favourite pundits, Gary Neville, Jamie Carragher, they get criticised too. So who am I to not be criticised because I'm a woman? So
but criticised as a pundit or a commentator.
Criticised as a pundit, that's the key. That's the key, and a lot of the time I'd see stuff on Twitter like, she's a woman, she doesn't know what she's talking about, and it's like, come on, you know, let's move on from that.
I spoke to Maggie Alfonsi actually on this podcast too, but similarly she said when she was then being criticised for the comments she was making, that made her really happy. She's happy that her decisions are being questioned.
That was time on Twitter I go back and forth with fans about, you know, the game and different things in the game. I'm happy with that because it means that my opinion is being heard.
It's valid.
But you know, when it becomes, how do you know you're a woman? It's like, listen, mate, I've got more success in my little toe, you know, than you. So let's just stick to the football, you know.
Talking Twitter and social media, you've had more than your fair share of social media kind of abuse and vitriol through Twitter and the like. So how do you feel, you know, what should we be doing? I think I almost feel at the moment in terms of racism and sexism and homophobic vitriol, it just seems to be increasing. So what do you feel about how we can stop that?
I just think Twitter needs to buck their ideas up, basically. when you go to an airport and you want to get on the Wi-Fi, you've got to put in all of your details, your phone number, you get a text message through. So there are platforms that you need to put in more details about yourself than on Twitter. Whereas Twitter is so I do think that there needs to be far more verification, so that if people are stupid enough to tweet out this vitriol, you will get punished for it. And the reason why people know that they can get away with it is because they know they can hide behind the anonymity that Twitter allows. So I think it's down to Twitter now, it's down to Facebook to really buck these ideas out, because if you're walking on the street and somebody shouted that stuff to you, I could get you arrested.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why is it any different?
Yeah, absolutely. You've been playing for Juventus now, and obviously we mentioned earlier, it's a real record-breaking game they had earlier this year, just under 40,000 fans that came through. And I feel a lot of that was the issuing of free tickets, which actually was done again for the first Chelsea game. And yet at Chelsea, they issued 41,000, and I think they had 25,000 turned up. So do you think there's a cultural difference in terms of giving free tickets away to build attendance?
Do you know what? I think it's a marketing strategy that is needed. It's a risk, but it's needed, because you've got to be able to give people exposure, a taster. You know, I use the analogy of, like, you know, sometimes when you go to like a market and somebody gives you like a taster of food and you taste it, that's what makes you want to buy it.
Absolutely.
Not because you were thinking of buying it before. So
like sampling
something,
isn't it?
So that's the way I kind of see women's football. That people, you need to get the masses to taste it first, and then they'll come. How you get them to taste it is up to you. You know, free tickets or very cheap tickets, it doesn't really matter. In Juventus's case, it was a top of the table clash, a title decider.
Big game,
Juventus v Fiorentina. Juventus is very much a club where people turn up to go on tour in the masses. So people see it as a stadium experience. Stamford Bridge, I think, maybe not so much. So there's different reasons why, you know, Chelsea may not have sold out that day, but ultimately 25,000 people still turned up.
Absolutely,
and I think we need to remove this pressure of selling out stadiums. Sometimes men's stadiums don't sell out. You know, we're putting so much pressure on the women's game. It's like, we got to get there. No, let's see the progress. Let's see it as 25,000 people come, because 5 years ago 25,000 people would not have come.
And over 30 at the Etihad the day before.
I think there's 25,000 today against Brazil. There's 70,000 sold against Germany next month. This is all amazing.
All the things
people who want to prod it and go, but listen. 5 years ago, this would not have been the case. And in another 5 years' time, we'll be sleeping with our eyes closed, saying, well, the game's sold out, can't get a ticket. I really believe that.
Fantastic. You've got a first-class law degree, and you worked as a solicitor, and I believe you just completed your UEFA Masters in football. So what does the future hold for Eni Aluko?
Well, I mean, probably in my last year or 2 years of playing, I think I've been quite open about that, because I think that you have to get to a point where you accept that you can't play forever.
Does that excite you, the sort of?
It is exciting, because I've always been preparing for the life after football. I think the fear of not having anything to do after playing has driven me to plan so much after playing. So now it is an exciting time. Obviously, I'm in my final year at Juventus. I think the next step for me is kind of working. One of the reasons why I did the Masters is to work as a sporting director. I've always kind of said I don't think I'll do coaching, but in terms of the other side of the game, which is like recruiting players, setting culture, sort of endorsement deals, commercial deals for clubs, building a women's team up.
And using all the skills you've got from your law degree and your work.
Because it is quite a legal, it can be quite a legal role in terms of all the contracts that you have to oversee. And just a management overseeing role, I think that's what's coming. So exciting announcements coming up. It's all exciting, and it's something that I think I encourage all players to think about. You know, enjoy your career, enjoy playing as long as you can, but also, you know, look forward to what you're going to do for the next 20 years. Because, you know, as footballers, we're so lucky that we get opportunities much quicker than other people because of who we are. And so there shouldn't be any fear around what you're going to be in the next 20 years, you know?
Fantastic. And my final question, if there were a couple of teachings that you wanted to pass on to young women who maybe are passionate about sport, I'm thinking of my 3 teenage daughters here, really? But what would they be? What are the key things you think from your learnings?
Well, I definitely think self-validation is a big one, because that was probably the most difficult times of my life when I was younger, and when obviously I got older, was this idea that I didn't really know how to tell myself that I was good enough. And I think a lot of people struggle with that, it doesn't discriminate. Men, women, ageless, it's kind of a voice in your head that you need to kind of control. So absolutely for teenage girls, that self-validation. And that's kind of the chapter Heaven's number 9 is that whole analogy that even though parents were sort of poking at me, I felt like I was born to play football. So I'm Heaven's number 9. Like I was picked by heaven to be number 9, and that's me, and that kind of affirmation. I think the other one is learning how to deal with difficulty in your life when it comes, because it will come.
Yeah. And failure, you talk about kind of seeing failure as an opportunity.
Seeing failure as an opportunity. I was crippled by failure to a certain. I wanted to quit the game because of it, which is bonkers, because as an athlete you will fail. But it was an irrational kind of fear for me. And it's being able to say, in any area of life, if you fail, see it as something that's going to drive you to be better. Don't let it cripple you. And I think for young people now, a lot of young people don't want to put the work in to get where they want to get to. It's kind of like they expect it to be like, and I have 2 teenage sisters, so I know what I'm talking about. Like, I'm always giving them pep talks. I'm like, you need to put it in first, and so I think it's a good lesson for young teenagers to say, if you start on a path to something, you might veer off a little bit, but use it as motivation to become better. Because in my case, the year after I failed badly publicly, we went on to win the double, and I know for a fact we wouldn't have been able to do that if it wasn't for the previous failure. So those 2 lessons, I think, I really hope resonate with people that read the book.
I really hope you enjoyed hearing from Eni as much as I did talking to her. She's such a brave and extraordinary woman, and I very much look forward to hearing what's coming next in her career. If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes, and why not listen back to some of the other incredible, fearless women in sport I've featured in the first 2 series. If you have a moment to give the podcast a rating or review on iTunes, it makes a massive difference to helping me reach new audiences too. Thanks again to Sam Walker and the team at What Goes On Media for all their help in producing these podcasts. I'll be back in the new year with Series 3. The Game Changers. Fearless Women in Sport.